big bad Brian Walsh. How are you, brother?
I'm good. How are you? Great to see you.
I'm doing fantastic. I've been waiting for this. I've been waiting for this segment with you for a while. We've really been enjoying these as our listeners have been getting to know our facilitators better, and so I'm not sure many people know how far you and I go back, but one of the first questions I wanted to just ask you was, like, just for the listeners, obviously I'm aware, but how did you wind up coming to force management?
Well, I mean, I officially came in September of 2012, but as
2012?
Yeah, but as you mentioned, it goes back to the early 90s, right? When you and I first met. So, you and I were in that same management development track at Xerox, and we met at Leesburg, the Xerox International Training Center, where you and I both did a 2-year tour of duty, and we didn't know of each other until we both got there. And it was funny was, I grew up in Northern Ohio and was working here, and you had grown up in Detroit and we're working there. So we weren't that far apart, but the way the company was built back then, we were in separate worlds, right? We really were in our own little district. And so we met. I'd been at Leesburg a year, and you came in, and you were coming in at the beginning of my second year for the beginning of your first year in that program. And your wife Ann was about to have your second, right?
Would have been, yeah, it was Emily, you're right. Yeah, it would have been second.
Yeah, and so you and I just became fast friends. And to me, it felt like we'd known each other forever when we first met.
Yeah, well, I have really fond memories of that. That corporate training and development center. I'd never guessed that I would ever be doing what I'm doing for a living. But if it hadn't have been for what I learned from that corporate training and development center, and from you, so you were my mentor when I got there. And I often told people, I remember telling Grant Wilson, the co-founder of Force Management, when we first started the company, and I said, man, if we ever get any bigger, I can't wait to introduce you to Brian Walsh, who is the best front of the room person that I've ever met. And I would say that to him all the time. And Grant would say to me, hey, why don't you call Brian? And so I was calling you.
Yeah.
I think you have to correct me on this, but I tell people that I think of all of my years of sales management and just management, I think that you were probably one of my coveted recruits, because it took me 10 years to recruit you. I think I called you every single year. Not, our families know each other, and so we were catching up, but I would always throw that in and say, hey, bud, how you doing? Love to have you over here at Force Management.
I was always too scared. you know how I'm built. I'm one of these loyal types, and I always appreciated it. It meant a lot, but I always had an excuse not to come. It was like, oh, I'm going to get my master's, or oh, I just got the next job, or we're about to have our next child. So I always had a reason. But what I find fascinating about that, actually, John, is in 2012, when I decided I wanted to move on and change careers, it was I reaching out to you. And it was just a weird, it was my turn that time to reach out to you. And the moment you heard me say it, you were like, well, let's go. And so then, over the next few months, we figured it all out. And I was so excited. And what was really funny was when I reached out to you, I wasn't even thinking about coming. I was just saying, hey, I'm starting a job search and I need some advice and counsel. And you said, well, wait a minute, why not us? And so it was so organic. It was so natural in terms of how it all happened, which I thought in the end was really a good thing, right? And, I think for everybody listening, and I talk about this with organizations when we talk about these kinds of topics, what you and Grant did for me as I transitioned out and transitioned in, you helped me transition out in a way that I'm not sure I would have been able to do on my own, because I had never had to have those conversations. I never really had to prepare for them. And the two of you really helped me think through what it was like to to be able to leave. And I mean, I knew I wanted to leave gracefully and all of that, but you really helped me think through it. And I think that's not that this was supposed to be a learning moment, but there's like a nugget here that I hope anybody listening would think about. If you're getting ready to do something that's going to change your life or change your career, it's just as important to be ready for that moment when you're going to tell people. And you and Grant really helped me think through that and understand how important it was to do that. That was really helpful.
It's so critical. I mean, you and I talk about this a lot with companies that we work with. You know, you got to be recruiting all the time, and you know, I'm kind of proud of the fact that, you know, you and I had a meaningful conversation probably every year from the first few years of, you know, for force management, and when we were looking to, you know, to scale. And, you know, the responsibility that I felt to help, because I knew anybody, a talent like you. And so for our listeners that are listening to this, like if you're recruiting an A player, like Brian was an A player and not in play player, you got to catch him in transition, and you got to, you know, he knew enough about force management over time just because we had been talking every year about force management. But to get Brian ready, to get you ready, Brian, to go have that conversation, because when you were done, you were like, okay, I want to do this right. But you know, I'm done. And I said, Brian, they're not going to let you go, dude. Like, if you think you're going to walk in there and say, hey, want to do this right, want to do this gracefully or whatever, and you know, they're going to throw the kitchen sink at you, and I think most people really underestimate that. Most recruiting managers really underestimate, if you're going after an A player and you want them, that same company that's potentially going to lose them is going to want to keep them just as bad. And that was a really good experience that you and I had, because we were prepared. We were prepared. And, you know, Xerox came back to you and said, hey, Brian, you know, how about this and how about that? And you were very gracious and professional, and you had already made up your mind. And so it worked out in a great transition. But I think people really underestimate, if you've been with a company for a while and you're doing really well, if you don't think they're going to lay down in the door in front of you before you go, then it's harder to leave than most people think.
So, it's one thing to get somebody to say, I'm going to leave. It's another thing to make sure they actually do. Right. And so that was a big moment.
We're so thankful, dude. We're so thankful that you came. It's almost been 10 years now, which blows me away. And you know, you're one of the favorite facilitators in the company. Companies just love you, participants just love you, and so we're really, really thankful. And you run that organization now, so now you're recruiting other facilitators to come, and you're developing other facilitators. So it's just such a joy for me to have this conversation with you. Let's dive into the list of things that we've been kind of consistent talking to the other facilitators about. Let's back it up a little bit. Why did you get into sales, Brian? Why did you get into sales?
So the short story is I entered college as an accounting major, and I was a couple years in, I was doing fine, but I got involved in a lot of the business school activities. And before you knew it, I was, you know, doing some speech contests and doing, you know, some public speaking and stuff. And then, you know, about my summer job at the big amusement park here up on Lake Erie. And that, it was those two experiences. It was some of these college experiences and getting involved in like programming and doing stuff in the business school. And then this summer job where I was effectively doing a bad stand-up act 20 times a day for, you know, 10, 12 minutes on the big riverboat. And people, adults, you know, I'm a 19, 20-year-old kid, and these adults would come up to me after, or they'd ask questions at the end of that boat ride. And, you know, what are you majoring in? And I'd say accounting, and people would laugh. And I'd have men and women stop me after and say, hey kid, you're a marketing guy, you're a sales guy, you're this. So I went back to school for my junior year, and I went to I still remember his name, Dr. Kimmel, my favorite accounting teacher. And I went into his office, and I already had my coursework set out for the year to include, I think I was supposed to take tax accounting that fall. And I said, listen, I'm starting to think maybe I'm more of a marketing sales major. And he looked at me and he said, well, it's about time you figured it out.
Really?
Yeah. And he literally stood up, he said, come on. And he walked me down the hall to the marketing department, and he personally helped me change my course load. And I just, and from there, back then, Xerox had a big presence on campus. Imagine one of the big technology players today,
Oh yeah.
right? And they would come in and do these business seminars, and they'd take 15 or 20 college students for 3 or 4 days. And I applied and got into that. And what I didn't know was they used that as a recruiting mechanism. They would use that to look for talent. And 4 or 5 of us out of that group of 15 or 20 ended up taking jobs there as sellers. And the rest is history. I mean,
it's amazing. It's amazing when I think about you and you tell me, I didn't know, or I had forgotten that you were an accounting major, because it seems so non-believable. You're probably one of the most extroverted. Not that accountants are introverted, but
the stereotype,
But you are one of the most extroverted people I've ever met. And I remember a time where we were goofing around and we were in the car, and you and me and Kenny Grenadier, and we're joking around. And I'm not going to embarrass you, but I'm going to try not to embarrass you. But dude, you're a professional performer, meaning singer. Like you are one of the best singers I've ever met that doesn't do it for a living.
Very nice.
And so do you remember that day when we were in the car, and I was going to try to embarrass you and put in that little tape that you had in your car, and then I put it in, and Granny and I were just like, holy smokes, Brian, is that you?
Yeah.
That unbelievable.
Yeah. So that's, that, and then you get into the job, and because, when you're right out of college and you get this job, in this case in sales, I think, John, a lot of your desire to stay in that profession, whatever profession it is, has a lot to do with your initial experiences. And I was actually going to quit after about 6 months. My first boss was persona non grata. He was never there. And I got a second job that next January, and second boss that next January. And I know we're going to talk about some of that later, but he's really the reason I stayed. And because of that, I was able to really develop and flourish and see sales as more than just making money, which was obviously a big part of it, but also this, hey, there's a lot of value in just like the service that you give and how you help people think through problems. And if you're not the right fit, if you do this well, it's a consultative approach, and it doesn't really matter. And like you get over the hurt of being rejected. It was, that's the other part. I got lucky. I landed in a place that had a sales mentality, that. And then I had a couple of managers early in my career who really made a difference.
My experience was very, very, very similar to yours. Thank God for that academic advisor. I can't even imagine. Well, I know what you would be doing. Even. I know you'd be on Broadway or doing something like that.
That was the goal. My goal was to actually be a performer, and my family, and including some people who were in the business, said, go get a business degree. And then if you want to do that for a living, come out to Los Angeles, kind of thing. Well, not only did I find my calling professionally here, but I also met Jenny in college. And so, those two things changed everything.
Yeah. And I'm not allowed to say, what I want to say about
the clown,
Jenny,
big clown
just
shoe,
to say, I think the phrase is, you outkicked your coverage there, brother.
That's right.
Let's just put it at that.
I did. Yeah.
Hey, let's dig into some little bit of funnies. This will be good with you. Tell me the worst mistake that you think that you ever made in a sales job.
And unfortunately, I learned the lesson as a rep. And I got the story. I was a bit of a waiter, in that I would wait for things to happen. And I had this boss who I think got tired of me waiting. And it was the end of the quarter. And I remember I had a couple of deals still on the table, and I only needed one of them to get over the quarterly bonus. And I was waiting. And she says, I remember Pat Elizondo, she says, you got 2 deals left on the table. And it was the last day of the quarter. And she says, you only need one of them to get over the line. Which one has a better chance? And I said, this one. It was at a school district that was relatively close to our office. And she said, well, what are you doing? I said, well, I'm waiting. I think the guy's name was Jerry, the business manager. I said, I'm waiting for Jerry to call me and tell me he's got, we've got the order. And she said, she looked at her watch. It was like 2:00 in the afternoon. She said, "Why are you sitting here?" And I just looked at her and she goes, "Go, go there and wait, go knock on the door." So I said, okay. So I get in my car and I drive over and I walk into the Board of Education office and I tell his administrative assistant, why I'm there. She knew who I was, she knew, and she said, "Well, let me see if he can see you." And so I sat down and I'm in the lobby. She goes back, she comes back out. She says, "He said he can see you, but it's going to be a bit." I said, "No problem." I sat there for 2.5 hours. I waited and I waited and I waited and I didn't leave because I knew if I left, Pat was going to kick me in the head when I got back. So I waited, and finally it was already 5 o'clock or maybe just after. He comes out and he lets me back to his office, and from there I go in and he's giving me a bit of a hard time, and he finally gives me the order. And I go back to the office, and you remember those days we would keep the lights on for order administration, all of that. I got the order in, I got my bonus, and it wasn't until years later, I don't remember how many years, where she was back in Cleveland and we were talking and that story came up and she says, "He knew you were coming." I said, "What?" She says, "I called him."
Oh,
the moment I left her office, she called him and said, "Listen, here's what's going on. I need to teach this kid a lesson." And he made me wait outside of his office for 2.5 hours. He had every intent of giving us the order that day, but she and he cooked up this little plan to teach me a lesson. Oh yeah, I never waited again. You know what I mean?
Yes.
And it taught me a good lesson about, and I saw a video recently with John McMahon, who I've never met, but I know you know very well. But he made this comment about a rep, I want to say in Italy, and this concept of urgent and authentic discovery.
Carlo.
Yeah, and I love that story because it literally brought that back, my story back to me. And I in that moment, I remember learning the lesson of urgency.
Yeah.
Don't wait. But there's always something else you can be doing to provide value and move the deal forward and those kinds of things. So
that's a great story, dude. I love that. Hey, tell me, what's the funniest thing that's ever happened to you on a sales call? And I probably, when you got this list of questions beforehand, you're like, well, which one do I pick?
I know. And so I'm picking the first one.
Okay.
This is the first one. I was 23 years old and I'm working in Youngstown, Ohio. And I'm calling on the mid-market customers at that point, right? I'm just like the new business rep for the mid-market customers. And I had this deal I was working at Youngstown Welding. And I still remember the name of the company. In fact, I looked them up the other day. They're still there. I had this deal I was working on, and they had one of our devices, but they had a whole bunch of competitive stuff, both copiers and even some printers back then. And typewriters were big back then, IBM Selectrics, and we were trying to replace them with the Xerox memory writer and stuff. And I remember looking at this account going, boy, this would be a big account for somebody like me. I'm just trying to replace the one Xerox device to, get them the new technology and get a foothold in. And one thing led to another, and they demoed one of our memory writers and they loved it. Everything was great. And this guy pulls me in, he says, "Listen, we're gonna think about doing that one copier, but the rest of that stuff we can't afford right now." So now all of a sudden my big deal is falling apart. It's gonna be
yeah.
I go, "Well, that's
and you had to unbundle all the prices."
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. And he says, and I quote, "Boy, it would be a shame if, he made some comment about getting burglarized. It would be a shame if we got burglarized." And, and I just passed right past me. And about a week later on a Monday morning, I get a call at the office and it's him. And he says, "Hey, you're not going to believe what happened." I said, "What's that?" He says, "We got burglarized over the weekend. All of our IBM typewriters are gone." I'm like, "What?" And someone had burglarized. They didn't take any of the tooling, anything like that. They took all of the office equipment. Somebody came in and stole all the office equipment. So
was
now
it you?
I'm like, no, wait. So now I'm like, I'm going, okay, I'm coming out. but I actually have someone traveling with me today that they were doing a big blitz day and they brought all the region people in. I had this woman from Chicago who I had never met before, who was a region person, Nancy Allen. I still remember her name. And we go out and we meet with this guy that day, and I've got the pricing built in, et cetera, et cetera. And here's the best part. So not only is this like going to be an easy sale, right? Because they got insurance money. I don't know what's going on. All I know is they're about to buy a bunch of stuff. I got the proposal ready, and he looks at it, and I had introduced him to her, and he knows she's like one of the big region people, and he says, I think we're ready to go. I said, okay. And she looks at me, she goes, great, let's write the order. Now, back then we had order agreements that we could write right there on the spot.
Yeah.
I didn't have one.
Oh, buddy.
I didn't have an order agreement.
No.
Wait, I didn't have an order agreement. I have to sheepishly look at this guy and say, I don't have an order agreement. And she looks at me, she goes, you don't have an order agreement? I go, no. And she takes over, she looks at him, she says, I probably shouldn't mention anymore. Well, statute of limitations at this point. I said, Dave, she says, Dave, can we come back in about an hour? Because our office was right down the street. He says, sure. He looks at me, goes, you're in trouble. and she says, no. So we're going to go back and write the orders and bring them back for him to sign. And on the way back to the office, she says, all right, we're going to make a deal right now. I said, what's that? She said, we're not going to tell anybody ever about you not having an order agreement for that call, but you're never going to go on a call again without an order agreement in hand.
Dude, you're lucky. You work for some.
Yeah,
you work for some really cool people, man. Because I never would have lived that. The crew I was working for, I never would have lived that.
Never would have lived it down. I never told anybody that because she and I had that agreement. But it was a funny, because then we went back, we got the deal signed. We went, the three of us went to lunch, and we just laughed and laughed and laughed. And to the day I left Youngstown, which was a year or so, 2 years later to the next role I was in, he and I stayed in touch. They were ongoing customer and stuff. And he never told me what really did happen or didn't happen.
Yeah, because it's kind of odd.
He told burglarized.
He mentioned burglarized before you even left the first time.
Yeah, it was like something out of a movie. I mean, it was Youngstown. That was the kind of thing that would happen in Youngstown.
Yes. I think he was just tired of the IBM typewriter.
That's exactly right. And the people moaning about him. That's exactly right.
Hey, dude, who's the best salesperson or sales leader that you ever worked with in your career?
The best sales manager I ever had was Jeff Canada. He taught me how to sell. He taught me how to sell. He taught me about, preparing your day, really knowing where you're going the next day, the night before. He taught me about how to have conversations with clients that were about them first, not our product first. He was like, he was the second manager I ever had. He was, and to this day, I owe him a lot about just pure sales skills. And the best, and I had other great managers in Pat and Freddie Thomas and others. So, that it's almost unfair to ask me who it is.
Yeah.
And then the best manager I ever had from a leadership perspective was Brian Leedy. But again, I worked with some other, I got the chance to work not too closely, but I got the chance to meet Ann Mulcahy, our CEO, a number of times. I was really lucky to have great people to look up to, but Brian Leedy, just like Jeff Canada, was willing to meet you wherever you were. And not just me, but anyone that worked for them, right? So as a seller, Jeff Canada was great at that. As a leader, Brian was great at that, teaching you how to lead, right? So I was really lucky. And I think what they have in common was that they were both able to meet you wherever you were in your skill set and give you the next thing that you needed and really coach you on it, not just tell you what to do. They were both great coaches of skill and the skill that you needed in the role that you were in at the time.
Yeah, you guys had great leaders and coaches in Cleveland, and you mentioned Freddie Thomas.
Freddie Thomas.
Yeah, in the Ohio. I think the what did they call them? Business unit back then. And Freddie had a twin brother named Johnny Thomas, and Johnny Thomas was one of my great mentors. And I got to tell you, I was thinking about John the other day, and I don't know how many people we averaged on a team, Brian, somewhere between 7 and 10. And John probably had a group of about 10 probably. And the managers that you're referencing, they had big teams as well, just because they had a lot of capacity. But think about this concept. John Thomas called me every morning at 7 a.m. Every single morning at 7 a.m. John Thomas called me every night at 10 p.m. And I remember in the early days, my wife, Ann, she would be like, what type of a lunatic are you working for that calls? And the phone would ring. And I think it was just in the beginning days when we might have had cell phones. There weren't these big brick things, but I'm thinking a lot of times he was just calling on the home phone. You didn't have call waiting, whatever, but you just knew that that's John Thomas. And I have such an appreciation for that today. So listeners, I'm not telling you that you got to call but I'm just telling you, think about this. He was so instrumental in me showing up prepared every single day. And for the next day, he'd be like, okay, where are you going today? Boom, boom, boom. And we talk about it. What are you going to say? Let's role play that conversation.
It wasn't what time he was calling. You wouldn't be doing that anymore. But you're right on it. The level of care that those leaders took.
Unbelievable.
For you, because that's really because if it wasn't care for you, they wouldn't have done it as consistently. If it was only worrying about John's got to deal in the forecast and I got to make sure it comes through, that's the only time you'd hear from him. But you heard from people like Jeff and Fred and John, his brother, et cetera, consistently. Like Jeff Canada had a team of major account reps calling on the biggest accounts on the eastern part of Ohio, and then me. I was the little commercial rep because you had to have one over there. Jeff was going to make his number with or without me. My performance was meaningless to Jeff's team performance. He spent as much, if not more time with me than he did with anybody else on his team consistently.
Yeah. That's such good valuable nuggets when I think about that. It's like you talked about meeting people where they are. We talked about investing, helping people be prepared regardless of, regardless of how much revenue they're bringing to the table. I mean, Jeff was investing in you because he knew you were going to run the place someday like you did. And I think John was doing the same thing with me. But the interesting thing was they did that with everybody. So when I started to feel comfortable to just not complain, but just go, man, this dude calls me and he goes, yeah, me too. And I checked with everybody on my team, and John Thomas was doing that with every single rep that he had on his team, calling him in the morning and then calling him in the evening and asking him how the day went. Okay, what are you going to adjust for tomorrow? Just really, really old school, which is just a lost leadership art, I think. All right, last question, brother. Last question for you. What's the best piece of sales advice you ever got and that maybe you don't often hear? Best piece of sales advice you ever got.
You know what?
Maybe we're
kind of swimming around it right now. I mean, I think a lot of people hear the word prepare a lot, but the word I hear used, the one that really sticks with me, and the one that is kind of akin to that, and it reminds me of one of the best reps I ever worked with, who sadly passed away last year, much too young, Dan Onuska, was strategy. And what I mean by that is, if you were working on a deal with Dan, who was a career seller, account executive, product specialist, he carried the big iron at Xerox. So, he sold the big stuff. Dan was the one who would always get the group to stop, because everybody's ready to run out the door and go, what do you like to say? Rip the heads off chickens, right? Dan was ready to just go take the hill. People were ready to go take the hill. And Dan would be the one a few days ahead of time saying, wait a minute, hold on. What's our objective for this meeting? What's our agenda? What's the choreography? Like, who's going to do what when? What's the outcome? And then what's the question we're going to ask at the end? Like, Dan was this master strategist that would really get the team to think through those 4 or 5 things. We never, Dan and I were peers, and then Dan was a product specialist when I went off to Virginia, and then I came back, and at one point I was running a team, and Dan was on the team, and then I was running the region, and Dan was still a part of the team. So Dan and I had this long career together, and he was one of the people, not the only one, but he was one of the people that I always knew he was always going to be ready, and more importantly, the team collectively was going to be ready because of his mindset. And you never went on a call with Dan that went wrong. Never. Imagine that. Never.
Yeah.
You didn't always get the outcome you wanted, right? That's not what I'm suggesting. but it was always well done. It was always well thought out. It was always well executed. He was a master at that. And
Makes me
that's the
think
word,
about
strategy.
some of the best advice that I got, and probably in our Xerox days. I can't remember who it came from, but they were telling me the difference between stress and pressure
Pressure.
is preparedness.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that is, now that we're just kind of reminiscing a little bit, that was a wonderful lesson that we learned early that just never goes away. It is still the same for me today.
And therein lies, I think, the nugget, which is everything we talked about today has nothing to do with the fact that we sold when we sold, or, the market has changed or any of that stuff. The reality is the things we're talking about are tenets that do not change. These are universal truths that do not change. And that's the beauty.
No doubt about it. So, brother, we are so blessed to have you at Force Management. The what you do in the marketplace, and the market feedback, and the customer feedback, and the participant feedback is always just first class. We're so thankful to have you, so grateful to have you. And I know that we're growing leaps and bounds here at Force Management. I'm surprised we even got you for this podcast with your schedule, but I thank you.
I was thrilled to do it.
Yeah, brother, I thank you for the time. You're an absolute blessing to us and to our listeners. And we just wish you continued success, and then also best wishes to the family.
Thanks, my friend. Thanks
All
a
right,
lot.
brother.
It was really fun to do this. I'll see you soon.
No doubt, brother. See you soon.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.